So, Logic Remote for the iPad. Is it any good? Let's find out. Okay, so here we are in my Logic session for just a little instrumental track that I've been working on just for fun, and I just want to quickly show you guys some of the features that makes Logic Remote on the iPad so useful. The first thing I want to talk about, and probably the most useful, is using Logic Remote for automation. And let's say we want to automate the volume. Well, then we can go right here onto Logic Remote, and we can just start playing the track and moving the fader, and it will track exactly how we've moved the volume and record it. And then, of course, if you guys are familiar at all with automation, you know that when we play it back, the fader will follow the motion that we recorded. The next most useful thing to me is how well the Logic EQ is built into Logic Remote on the iPad. And the reason why it's so useful is because if you select a channel that you want, we'll use the same channel, and we select the EQ on the iPad here, we double click it, you can see that we have a really clear view of what the EQ looks like without even having it up on the screen. And if I bring it up on the screen just to show you as an example, you can see that I can actually move the EQ. You can see my mouse is over here, nowhere near the EQ. And I can actually move it with my iPad, and it follows it perfectly on my computer. This allows for a much more tactile feel for the EQ, and it allows for a smoother, more enjoyable mixing experience, honestly. So the next really useful thing is if you want to add a plugin to one of your tracks, you can simply go to the track you want and click an empty spot and then choose plugin. And let's say we go to EQ and do maybe a vintage EQ, and we can choose exactly which one. And you can see that on the screen here, it added this EQ that we added in the iPad app, and it shows up right there. Now, the main problem with using plugins on Logic Remote is the fact that most of them don't have such a good integration as the default Logic EQ does, as we just saw. So for example, even this one, if I tap on it, we can click on Open Plugin here, and you can see that it's not a super intuitive design. Most of the plugins will end up looking like this in a sort of confusing conglomeration of faders and sliders and buttons that's not super useful when compared to the sort of visual version of it that we get within Logic. But it's still nice to have. It's not the best feature of Logic Remote. Hopefully maybe it'll get an update eventually so that it works more intuitively with more of the default Logic plugins. But for right now, this is what we're left with. The next thing I want to talk about, and perhaps the most obvious, is just the panning and volume controls. Just being able to have sort of a mixer that's multi-touch right in front of you, and you can just grab all these faders. You can grab multiple ones at the same time. I have like 3 fingers on my screen right now. I can move all these faders all at once, and of course it syncs with the software. And when we select a fader inside of Logic here, let me close these plugins here. When we select a fader inside of Logic, it jumps right to it on the iPad screen. It's really handy because now we have direct control with multi-touch, and we don't have to worry about finding the exact channel we're editing on the iPad. And then of course, additionally, we have the mute, solo, and pan right at our fingertips as well. And it feels like a mixer, but more dynamic because we can move and adjust where we are in the mix and not have to limit ourselves to just one set of faders. So the next thing I want to talk about is send controls. So if you can see here on the iPad app, we can see all of our sends. So like maybe we're sending to a reverb bus, and we can just send how much of the track we want to go to that reverb just by moving it like this. It's just a really nice way to see where all of our sends are at a glance without having to go into the mixer in Logic when we're trying to maybe do some other editing as well. So we don't have to have the mixer on top of everything, and it can get kind of cluttered. So that's the main benefit of having this, is just being able to declutter your screen and have your mixer and some of your other controls off somewhere else, not only more tactile, but just less in the way. Okay, so from that video, you guys can kind of see how Logic Remote on the iPad can really enhance your workflow in a lot of ways if you already have Logic and you already have an iPad. Now, is it worth getting an iPad just for Logic Remote, or maybe even switching DAWs if you use something other than Logic? Probably not, but it's a super awesome tool that I wanted you guys to know about if you do use Logic for your music production and you do happen to have an iPad. Also note that it does work on an iPhone, so if you want, obviously it's a smaller interface, you have less faders, but let's say you're recording yourself and you maybe have like a closet recording booth, it's really handy to be able to use your iPhone to pause and play and record and adjust all the settings that you can do on the iPad. But anyways, that's been it. That's my quick look at Logic on the iPad. As always, if you guys have any questions, leave them down below in the comments section, and I'll be seeing you soon. Lots more videos to come. Peace.